part two of lesson two of this credit recovery for world history. We're going to get into the effects. So you notice that the battles and all that fun stuff, I'm not really going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the events that heavily dictated the outcome of the war and basically the major effects of the war. So I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on things I did not talk about in the American history side. So, as always, listen for the causes and effects, and then listen how diplomacy kind of kicked back in. And if you remember from part one, diplomacy was failing, appeasement was failing. That's diplomacy. So, it all kind of came down to the conflict side of things. So, that's how international relations were skirmished there. So, causes and effects, like I said, and then here we go. So, here is where you got to figure out what Hitler was kind of going for in his final solution. So, this is all stemming back to before World War II actually started. He's going to start preaching about this thing called the final solution to the Jewish question, which is eventually going to get shortened down to just the final solution. And this is where Hitler, in his book Mein Kampf, is going to point out about how the Jews were the major reason why they lost World War One. So this is what's going to kickstart the travesty that is known as the Holocaust. And it was his wild idea to exterminate or to have a genocide of the Jewish faith and the other undesirables, which the list can go on and on. But here we go. But there's acts of terrorism against Jewish people during this time. There's one night in particular called Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass. And that's where you're going to see Nazi soldiers are going to basically act like terrorists. They're going to go around and break windows and destroy property and ownerships, and they're going to arrest people and they're going to kill people. And it's a brutal, brutal night. So this is seen as kind of like the last straw, I guess you would say, for a lot of Jewish families in Europe. So a lot of them they're going to bail. They're going to try to get out of Europe, Germany, as fast as possible because they know what Hitler is basically kind of up to and is making their lives a living hell. You're going to notice that some scientists, Albert Einstein in particular, is going to make it out successfully, and that worked out pretty well for us. But not all Jews were as lucky because the ones that were trying to leave, whenever, sometimes when they would show up, they were turned back to Europe. So as you can imagine, that would be very disheartening, traveling, trying to seek freedom, only to be told to go back. So the United States, we didn't take as many as what we should have. Okay, reason being, we didn't know what Hitler's real major plan was. We were in the middle of a Great Depression. We could not support more people than what we absolutely needed. So when those Jews would show back up in Europe, they were basically packed up and they were sent off to the concentration camps. So, question, Hitler's final solution referred to? And then we're going to fast forward to the Germany surrenders. And the reason why I'm skipping over all the battles, like I said, is because that doesn't really matter for us. But this is when we found out what the plan actually was. This is when we found all those concentration camps and all those work camps, and we had no idea. So, why this matters is that you're going to notice that the effects of the Holocaust are going to be felt still today in the 20th century. I mean, when you talk about 6 million people dying in one faith and then 11 million people total, that's a large amount of the population during the time. So, at the end of World War II, when the Nazis are giving up, Nazi soldiers, officers that had direct tie to this are leaving. They're going all over the world, and a lot of them are going to end up in South America. But through the different acts of a new country, Israel, some parts of the governments around the world, they're going to be hunted down and they're going to be brought back to Germany and they're going to stand trial. They're actually called the Nuremberg trials, and they're super interesting if you want to get into, and they took a long time. But a lot of the heavy hitters of the Nazi army are going to be found guilty and they're going to be executed. Some of the soldiers, not so much because they said they were just following orders, and that's kind of a gray area in the military world. But question for you. It's known that 6 million Jews died during the Holocaust, but it's estimated how many people in total died. So, building up to how World War II ended in Japan, we got to know about something called the Manhattan Project. That's when we were developing the atomic bomb. So, the reason why we had it is because the bad guys were starting to build it as well. We knew that Japan was working on it. We knew that Germany was really close to doing it. And again, going back to Albert Einstein, he's the one that kind of led the charge on this. He writes a letter to FDR and says, "Hey, just so you know, the bad guys are building this. We need to beat them to it." So FDR, the president at the time, went all in on it and spent a large portion of our budget, $22 billion of today's money, to develop it. But it worked, and it worked successfully. Whoops, you can't see it with my Pear Deck thing there, sorry. But when Robert Oppenheimer put all the different pieces of this atomic bomb together, it worked remarkably well. And it basically was not even questioned whether to use it, because as soon as it was tested successfully, the bombs that they made were loaded up on boats and carried to Japan within 24 hours. So that's when it was dropped on Japan. And this is the first mushroom cloud of Hiroshima. This is the plane, or the flight crew of the Enola Gay, and it's the name of the mother of the pilot, Enola Gay, that actually dropped it. And Truman, after he found out that it worked, and it worked really well, he regarded the bomb as a military weapon and never had any doubts to use it. So it may have been extremely cruel because we used it on civilians as well, but it did end the war. So the lasting effects of the bombs are still being felt. So there's parts in Japan that are still not growing back because of all the radiation that was dumped into it. Okay, don't get me wrong, it's better, but it's still not as what it used to be. And it led to a lot of birth defects, if you will. But immediate effects, 60,000 people died right away. And then you see that 344,000 of a total population, when 60,000 disappear, that's a heavy chunk. And you're going to notice that after we drop the second bomb, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and China. That's old bad blood. I could go deeper into it. However, I'm not going to now. I will later. So when we drop the second bomb, that's where you're going to notice that 35,000 people are going to die. And again, that's kind of buckled in. So that's kind of a heavy loss for Japan to take. So they give up. That's when you're going to notice that the surrender of Japan officially ends World War II, and the official effect of 60 million people dying is going to be a thing. So, again, dropping the bomb was kind of necessary. Okay, I hate to say it like that, but think of it this way. Going back here, we dropped two bombs on them, and they still took their time on whether they should give up. The Japanese soldiers have no training to quit at all. So, therefore, harsh but needed. So, we already talked about this. So, going into this question, how many atomic bombs were dropped on Japan to end World War II? So here's where you see the total populations in percentages of how many people died. Okay, so don't let this the misleading here. Notice how it says 25% of Belarus's population died, but that number is 2.2 million. So notice Poland, 5.8 million people died, but that's just over 15% of their population. So it's kind of a tricky thing to read. So go back into the PowerPoint, really take a look at this, and notice how many people the Soviet Union lost and how much percentage of that is their country compared to the United States. So there's a reason why the Cold War, the next thing I'm going to talk about, happens, because Stalin is super angry about how many people he devoted to his cause or part of the World War II when the United States didn't lose near as much. So keep that in mind. So that's going to lead into two conferences that are worth noting. So before the bomb was dropped, and even before FDR was basically died, they made a plan on what to do with Germany. Since Germany started World War One and they started World War Two, they said there's no way that we can allow them to have any sort of power anymore. So they decided to divide it up into the different sections for the Allied powers. But the problem is that this capital of Berlin is in the center of the Soviet Union section. So they decided to divide that one up as well. So they made a plan, and they were going to say after the war was won, we're going to get back together, we're going to finalize it. So when it's actually finalized, they're going to say we're going to let them all kind of divide, or we're all going to let them decide what type of government they want to do. And we'll finish it all up in the final meeting. But in the final meeting at Potsdam, like right before we dropped the bomb, Stalin basically does a 180. He says, nope, we're not going to do that. And we're not going to have free elections. We're going to make our section communist. They don't get a say. And that's going to throw up a huge red flag to our now president, Truman, the one that actually dropped the bomb. He is going to say, quote, feeling that the Soviet Union was planning a world conquest. And he wasn't too far off, because it was shortly after this that basically the Cold War, the third major event of the 20th century, is going to start kicking off, all because of this meeting. So, again, World War II directly leads into another conflict that's going to be ongoing of the Cold War, but more about that when we get there. So, again, learning from our past, we know that we needed some sort of world organization to make sure that this didn't happen again. And the League of Nations didn't work, so we're going to try it again. We're going to call this one the United Nations, and we are going to join it. We're going to lead the charge along with a lot of other countries, 50 in total. This is still a thing today, so this is a major event as well. And this has kind of fed off a lot of conflicts in our history. Okay, so we are basically one massive alliance in the world at this point. So, as a result of the end of World War II, it led to which next major event?